The cold crept through the cracks in the wooden walls like a ghost, silent and slow, wrapping itself around the bare ankles of a woman named Alice. The fire in the hearth had burned down to nothing but red coals, and she dared not use more wood, not because it was scarce, but because it wasn't hers. In this tiny village tucked between damp fields and wild woods, ownership was a dangerous thing for women. Alice knew this too well. Her life, like the lives of most women in medieval Europe, was not her own. It belonged to the land, to the Lord, to the church, and to the silent laws that wrapped tighter than any chain. At just 16, she was already considered of age, not for schooling or adventure, but for marriage, childbearing, and obedience. She had learned to keep her voice low, her eyes down, and her thoughts tucked away like stolen bread. Her mother had taught her that before a fever took her one winter and left Alice to fend for her siblings. Now she was both sister and mother, and no one asked how she managed, because it was expected, just like everything else. The year was 1324, but time didn't matter here. Seasons mattered. Frost meant aching joints and hunger. Spring meant mud and the risk of losing children to coughs that turned into something worse. Summer meant long hours in the fields, even for women who were heavy with child. And autumn meant praying the harvest was enough to survive until the next. This cycle governed women's lives more than kings or popes ever could. Alice wasn't royalty. She wasn't a nun cloistered behind stone walls, nor a merchant's wife with a sturdy roof. She was a peasant, and being a peasant woman meant waking before the sun and working long after it went down. But even in the quiet of night, when the village slept and the stars blinked like tired eyes, her mind wandered. She wondered what life might be like beyond the fields. She had heard stories, whispers, really, of cities of women who spun silk or served in noble houses. Yet even those lives, as distant and dreamy as they were, weren't easy. The truth was, very few women had freedom. A noble woman might wear finer clothes and sleep on furs, but her marriage was likely arranged before she even learned how to write her name. Her role, too, was to obey, to bear sons, and to keep her place in a house ruled by men. If she stepped out of line, even slightly, she could be cast aside or locked away. For the women in convents, life was strict and silent, governed by rules of prayer and punishment. Some chose the church to avoid marriage, but many were placed there by fathers who saw them as burdens or assets. And still, despite everything, women carried the world. They birthed it, fed it, clothed it, and mourned it. They were midwives and healers, even if the law didn't recognize them. They were the keepers of stories, even if no one wrote their names in books. Alice, like countless others, held a kind of quiet strength that history often forgot. In her village, there was one figure that stood just outside the usual rhythm of things, a woman named Mirwin. Older than anyone could remember, with silver hair and a sharp tongue, Mirwin lived alone at the edge of the woods. Some called her a healer. Others called her a witch. Children were warned not to visit her, and yet mothers sometimes knocked on her door at night when a fever wouldn't break or a baby wouldn't come. Alice had seen it. She'd even gone herself once when her sister's cough wouldn't ease. Mirwin had given her a bundle of herbs and a soft look. "You've got your mother's hands," she said. Alice didn't know what that meant, but it stayed with her. The truth was, women like Mirwin were both feared and needed. They walked a fine line between survival and suspicion. The church frowned on women with too much knowledge, especially if that knowledge didn't come from a man or a holy book. But the people, ordinary folks scraping by, couldn't always afford to care about doctrine when sickness came. And so, the old woman stayed, half in shadow, half in light. Alice sometimes dreamed of asking Mirwin questions. About the herbs, about life beyond the village, about how to survive without vanishing into the routine of toil and silence. But dreams were dangerous things, especially for women. They could lead to disappointment, or worse, punishment. One night, while stirring a pot of thin stew, Alice heard a knock at the door. Her siblings had gone to sleep, huddled close under a patchy blanket. She hesitated. No one came to her door this late, not unless something was wrong. The knock came again, quicker this time. She wiped her hands on her skirt and stepped over the creaky floorboards. When she opened the door, a man stood there, cloaked and muddy. His face was drawn, his eyes wide. "You're Alice, daughter of Eelhild?" he asked, his voice urgent but low. She nodded, unsure whether to trust or flee. "I need your help," he said. "It's your sister. She's been taken." The words hit her like a stone in the chest. Her sister? Taken? By whom? Why? The man looked over his shoulder. "There's no time. It's the Lord's men. They say she ran. But I think," he stopped himself. "I can't explain here. You need to come. Now." Alice's hand shook. Her legs felt like straw. The air was suddenly colder, sharper. She grabbed her shawl and stepped into the night, not knowing what lay ahead. She didn't know that this moment would change everything, not just for her, but for the women of the village and perhaps beyond. For centuries, women like her had lived quiet, unseen lives, their pain woven into the fabric of history like threads no one bothered to name. But this story, her story, was about to twist into something else. Something bold, something dangerous. Because in a world where women were expected to endure, to serve, to be silent, what happened when one of them decided not to? The path ahead was dark, and the trees swayed like watchers. Alice held her breath and took the first step, unaware of the eyes following her from the forest's edge and the truth buried beneath the roots. The path was narrow, muddy, and unfamiliar. Alice kept close behind the stranger, her thoughts spinning faster than her steps. The only sound were the soft thud of their feet and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. He hadn't said much since they left, and she didn't dare ask more. Yet, her heart pounded, not from the cold, but from a thick, creeping fear that clung to her like the fog. "Where is she?" Alice finally whispered. He glanced back, his face half shadowed by his hood. "A cottage near the mill. They're keeping her there until the steward returns." "But why her?" she asked, her voice cracking. "They claim she stole something," he said, though his tone was full of doubt. "But it doesn't feel right. The steward doesn't waste his men chasing stolen bread." Alice felt her chest tighten. Her sister, barely 14, quiet and gentle. What could she have possibly done to deserve this? She remembered the last time she saw her, humming while she folded wool, her eyes tired but kind. There had been no sign of danger, no warning. And now, she was being held in some shadowy corner, without family, without defense. They reached a ridge, and the trees opened just enough to see a flickering light in the distance. The man pointed. "Down there. Stay close." The ground sloped downward, and Alice slipped more than once, catching herself on roots and branches. She could smell damp moss and old leaves. Everything felt unreal, like one of the strange dreams her sister used to describe, the kind that left you half awake with your stomach in knots. They crouched near a clump of bushes at the edge of the clearing. From there, Alice could just make out the shape of a small stone building. Light leaked through the cracks in the shutters. A horse was tied out front. A guard leaned against the door, arms crossed, half asleep. Inside, someone moved, a shadow pacing. "That's her," the man whispered. "I saw them bring her here." Alice stared hard. She couldn't make out faces, but the movement was careful, nervous, like her sister's. Her fingers dug into the earth. "What do we do?" The man hesitated. "You can't go in now. Too risky. But we wait. When the guard nods off, I'll get closer. Maybe we can get her out before the steward arrives." Alice's throat was dry. "And if they see us?" "They won't," he said, but she could hear the uncertainty behind his words. As they waited, the air grew heavier. Alice didn't know the man's name. She hadn't thought to ask. Everything had happened too fast. But something about him, his urgency, his fear, told her he wasn't lying. He wasn't just a passerby. Maybe he had lost someone too. Maybe he was trying to make something right. She wrapped her shawl tighter and tried to slow her breathing. It was a long wait. The minutes passed like hours. The guard's head dipped once, then again. At last, his chin rested against his chest, and his hand fell from his belt. The man looked at Alice. "Now!" He moved like a shadow, quiet and quick. Alice followed, her feet barely making a sound. Her heart thudded with every step. Closer now, She could hear the low murmur of voices inside, two men speaking in hushed tones, and a faint cough. Her sister. The man reached the wall and signaled for her to stay. He crept to the rear, searching for another way in. Alice crouched by the side, straining to hear more. Said she had something tucked in her belt, one voice said. Tried to lie about it. You sure it wasn't just a bit of thread? The other grumbled. She's just a girl. She looked like the old one, the healer's type, maybe more than a thief. Alice's blood ran cold. Mirwin. This wasn't about theft. It was about suspicion, about fear, about women who knew too much or seemed to step outside their place. There was a soft knock at the back of the cottage, barely a tap. Then the door creaked. Alice tensed. Suddenly, a cry rang out. Not her sister's, but the guards. He had seen them. Footsteps pounded the earth. Voices shouted. Run, the man hissed. Alice didn't think. She grabbed the edge of her skirt and darted into the trees. Her breath came in gasps. Branches whipped at her arms. Behind her, chaos broke. Men yelling, doors slamming. She didn't stop until she reached the ridge again. She turned, looking for her sister, for the man, but there was no one. Only the cold wind and the flicker of torchlight far below. Tears stung her eyes. She had come so close. Too close. Back in the village, things would not be the same. Someone would have seen her. Someone would speak her name. And in a place like this, rumors grew faster than crops. She returned home before dawn, slipping inside just as the sky began to pale. Her siblings still slept. The hearth was dark. She sat in silence, waiting for the knock she now feared. And it came, 3 loud bangs at sunrise. Alice opened the door to find 2 men in the livery of the Lord's house. One held a scroll, the other a rope. You've been summoned, the taller one said. The steward wants answers. About your sister. About the healer. About last night. Alice didn't reply. She stepped outside, her hands trembling. The village watched as she was led away. Some looked curious, others afraid. A few looked away altogether. Mirwin stood at the edge of the lane, her eyes calm but unreadable. As Alice passed, she gave a slow nod. That nod, small and silent, was enough to keep Alice walking. The Lord's manor loomed like a stone giant, quiet and cold. It wasn't the kind of place women entered unless they served or begged. She was doing neither. She was being questioned. And in a time where even small missteps could ruin a woman, the danger wasn't just being wrong. It was being seen. As the heavy doors creaked open, Alice took a deep breath. This wasn't just about her sister anymore. It wasn't just about last night. It was about every whispered story, every unspoken rule. Every time a woman had been punished for knowing, for wondering, for simply existing outside the lines. Inside, the steward waited, his ink-stained fingers resting on a worn ledger. He didn't look up right away. When he did, his gaze was sharp. Alice, daughter of Eelhild, he said, as if reading from a sentence. Do you know why you're here? She didn't answer. Not yet. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere in the woods, crows cried. The past was shifting, and so was the silence. And before this day ended, something buried for generations would start to rise. The steward's chamber was cold, not from lack of fire, but from the way it was built, thick walls, high windows, stone everywhere. Everything about it felt designed to keep people out or shut them down. Alice stood in the middle of the room, her hands clenched at her sides. She could hear her own breath. The steward, a man named Lord Roderick, sat behind a carved oak table. A scribe hovered nearby, quill ready, eyes avoiding hers. Your sister, Roderick said, finally breaking the silence, was found with a pouch of dried herbs. Unmarked, hidden in her clothing. Alice didn't move. Her heart hammered, but she said nothing. We suspect they were meant for healing, he went on. Possibly even charms or brews not approved by the church. And yet, you live near the old woman at the edge of the woods. Mirwin, Alice said softly. He nodded. You've spoken to her. Yes, she said, when my sister was ill. More than once. Alice hesitated. A few times. Roderick leaned back. And did she ever give you anything unusual? Potions? Signs? Did she speak of spirits or spells? No, Alice said. Her voice was firm, but quiet. Only herbs. Tea. Advice on breathing during fever. He tapped his fingers on the table. Still, she's known in the region. Not officially, of course. No charges have been brought. But it is important, Alice, that we maintain order. That we don't allow superstition to spread. Especially among the womenfolk. That word, womenfolk, landed like a stone in her stomach. Roderick studied her. You're not in trouble. Not yet. But your sister's fate depends on your honesty. If you know something, now is the time to speak. Alice swallowed hard. She could feel the weight of it. The choice lay before her. Betray Mirwin, and maybe her sister would be spared. Maybe. But what would that do? To their village? To herself? To the only woman who had ever treated her like more than a pair of hands? She lifted her chin slightly. Mirwin helps the sick. Nothing more. Roderick's eyes narrowed. That's your final answer? Yes, Alice said. He said nothing for a moment, then scribbled a note and handed it to the scribe. Take her to the holding room. What about my sister? Alice asked quickly. She remains in custody, he said, until further notice. The guard led her away through a side corridor. The room they brought her to was small, dim, and smelled of damp earth. It wasn't a prison cell, but it wasn't a place of comfort either. A stool in the corner. A single window, far too high to see out of. When the door closed behind her, it clicked with finality. She sat on the stool and wrapped her arms around herself. Her sister was still in danger, and now she was part of whatever game was being played, though she didn't know the rules or how it had even started. Mirwin had always been cautious, quiet, but maybe that wasn't enough anymore. Hours passed, or maybe it was only one. She couldn't tell. No one came. No one spoke. The only sound was the occasional creak of footsteps above her. Eventually, the door opened, and a woman stepped inside. She wasn't dressed like the others. No guard's uniform, no servant's apron. Her cloak was fine, but plain. Her hair was pinned back tightly. She looked like someone used to being obeyed. I'm Lady Sabina, she said. I oversee some of the matters the steward prefers not to handle directly. Alice stood slowly, unsure what to expect. Lady Sabina's gaze softened, just slightly. I know you're frightened, but I need you to understand something. This isn't just about your sister. There are people, men, who believe women should stay silent, obedient. But knowledge is dangerous, especially when it doesn't come from them. Alice stared. Do you believe Mirwin is dangerous? Sabina stepped closer. I believe she knows more than they're comfortable with, and that makes her a threat, even if she's never harmed a soul. Then why won't they let her be? Sabina's voice dropped. Because letting her be would mean admitting they don't control everything. The room felt colder suddenly, though Alice didn't move. Listen to me carefully, Sabina said. They're going to question you again, and they'll press harder the next time. If you stay quiet, they might punish you. But if you speak carefully, just enough, they might let your sister go. Alice shook her head. You're telling me to lie. I'm telling you to choose, Sabina replied. There's a difference. And just like that, she turned and left. Alice sat back down, her thoughts swirling. The world she had known, a world of rules, of silence, of just trying to survive, wasn't safe anymore. Not for her, not for her sister, and not for women who dared to know more than they were allowed to. Night came. A guard brought her a crust of bread and a mug of water. She barely touched them. Sleep refused to come. Instead, she replayed everything. The flicker of her sister's shadow in the cottage. The man who helped her and then vanished. The quiet nod from Mirwin. And now this. Sabina's warning. Or was it advice? By morning, she was taken back to the steward's chamber. This time, the tension was thicker. You've had time to think, Roderick said. Would you like to revise your statement? Alice stood taller. Her voice was soft but steady. No, I told the truth. The steward's eyes narrowed. Then you leave us no choice. Your sister will remain in the tower until further notice, and you will be watched closely. Alice felt her knees weaken, but she didn't fall. They led her back to the village by midday. The walk was silent. No one jeered. No one spoke, but she felt every eye on her as she passed. The rumor had already spread. Mirwin stood by the well as she returned. The old woman didn't say anything, just offered a small pouch of herbs and a glance that seemed to say not yet, but soon. Back at home, her siblings clung to her. "Where's Lena?" the youngest asked, his eyes wide. Alice couldn't answer. She spent the next days moving through routine, but everything felt changed. Her neighbors were wary. The fields were quiet. And then, one evening, just before dusk, a stone was thrown at her door. It had no note, just a small carving, a sigil. She recognized it. It was Mirwin's. Something was coming, and Alice would soon have to decide what kind of woman she wanted to be in a world that punished all the wrong ones. The question now wasn't if she'd fight, but how. And what would it cost to try? The stone sat on her table, rough and small, no bigger than a walnut. But it felt heavier than anything else in the room. Alice turned it over in her hand, again and again, her fingers tracing the faint lines carved into it. She had seen that mark once before, on the inside of Mirwin's cottage door. It wasn't a rune or letter, at least not one from the church books. It looked older, simpler, a quiet symbol meant only for those who understood. Alice didn't understand. Not fully, but something in her gut told her it meant come. She wrapped the stone in cloth and tucked it into the corner of a chest. The wind outside was picking up again, and the sky had that dull gray cast that always made the village feel smaller than it was. Her siblings were asleep, curled up together like kittens under the blanket. She watched them for a long time, thinking. Her sister Lena was still locked away. No word had come. No one from the manor had returned. No answers, no updates. Just waiting, waiting in silence. In the daylight, Alice did her chores as usual, though fewer people spoke to her now. The baker's wife, who once shared scraps of cheese and gossip, gave her only a tight nod. One of the older boys in the village, who used to carry wood for her, wouldn't meet her eye. The steward's suspicion had spread through the air like smoke, and though no one said her name aloud, it hung over every doorstep she passed. She didn't go to the well that afternoon. Instead, just before sunset, she made her way toward the edge of the village, where the path turned rough and trees stood closer together. The woods weren't thick, but they were deep enough to swallow sound. The birds quieted here, and even the wind seemed to hush. Everyone knew the way to Mirwin's, but few admitted to walking it. She moved fast but careful, her ears tuned to every snap of twig and rustle of leaves. When she reached the clearing, the cottage was dark, just a thread of smoke curling from the chimney. The door was shut but not barred. Alice hesitated. Then she knocked, once, twice, pause, just as Mirwin had told her to long ago when her sister had been feverish. The door opened slowly. Mirwin looked older than she remembered. Her face was a map of time, every wrinkle a quiet warning. But her eyes were clear and bright. "You came," she said, as if she already knew the answer. "I got the stone," Alice replied. "Then you're ready." Alice stepped inside. The warmth hit her first, not just from the fire, but from something else, something quiet and lived in. Herbs hung from beams. Small wooden bowls lined the shelves. A few candles flickered in odd corners, casting soft light over everything. It smelled of smoke, dried flowers, and something bitter she couldn't name. "I don't know what's happening," Alice said. "They still have Lena. And they think you," she stopped. She didn't want to say the words. "They think you're a witch." Even whispering it felt like inviting a curse. Mirwin stirred a pot hanging over the fire. "They've always thought that. They just needed a reason to act." "But why now?" Alice asked. The old woman poured something thick and steaming into a cup and handed it over. "Because fear is like rain in spring. It soaks everything, especially when women start asking questions. Or when they help each other without asking permission." Alice looked down at the cup. "What is this?" "Only something to calm your thoughts," Mirwin said. "Your mind's loud tonight." Alice took a slow sip. It was bitter but warm. She sat by the fire, letting the heat settle in her bones. "I want to help my sister, but I don't know what to do. They're watching me now." "You're not alone," Mirwin said. "There are others who see what's happening, who understand that this isn't about one girl or one bag of herbs. It's about control, about fear." Alice looked up. "Others? Here." The old woman nodded. "Some are too afraid to speak. Others are waiting, watching. We've survived by staying quiet. But sometimes the silence turns into a trap. Alice thought of Sabina, the noblewoman at the manor. Her words now felt like part of something larger, a thread she hadn't seen until now. She said there were people who believe knowledge should only come from men. And she's right, Mirwin said. The church doesn't write about women like me. They don't teach girls to read unless they're locked behind abbey walls. But every village has women who know the land, who remember the old ways, who help each other when no one else will. But they call it witchcraft, Alice whispered. Mirwin's smile was sad. Of course they do. That's easier than admitting they're wrong. The fire cracked softly. Alice felt something shift in her chest, a kind of weight settling in and lifting at the same time. I'm not brave, she said after a while. No one starts out brave, Mirwin replied. We just make a choice, and then another. And then one day, we look back and realize we did something no one thought we could. Outside, the wind was howling now, rising through the trees like a warning. Alice stood and moved to the window. In the distance, past the bare branches, she saw torches moving along the village road. Mirwin, she said quietly, someone's coming. The old woman didn't flinch. She stood slowly, took something from the shelf, a leather pouch, and handed it to Alice. Go. Back through the trees. Follow the stream north until it bends. Hide there. What about you? I'll be fine. I've done this before. But, go, child, she said, her voice firm now. And don't speak to anyone until you see the red ribbon tied around the oak tree. That's the signal. Alice backed toward the door, heart pounding again. She didn't want to leave her. Not now. But something in Mirwin's voice left no room for argument. She slipped outside, pulling her shawl close, and ran into the woods just as the first knock echoed behind her. She didn't look back. Branches clawed at her arms. Mud sucked at her shoes. The stream shimmered in the moonlight, and she followed it like a path from a story. The air was damp and thick, but she didn't stop. At the bend in the stream, she crouched beneath a tree, her breath ragged, eyes wide. She waited. Somewhere in the darkness behind her, the village changed. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it, like a rope pulled too tight, ready to snap. Alice clutched the leather pouch to her chest, still unsure of what was inside. She didn't open it. Not yet, because she knew, whatever was coming next, it wasn't just about healing or herbs. It was about survival, about truth, about women like her and her sister, and how long they could live under rules written by others. The ribbon hadn't appeared yet, but Alice stayed in the shadows, waiting. And somewhere not far off, the first crack of something old and hidden had just begun to split. The forest whispered all around her. Branches swayed, leaves rustled, and the soft bubbling of the stream was the only sound steady enough to trust. Alice crouched under the thick limbs of an old oak, her fingers curled around the leather pouch Mirwin had given her. The air was damp and cool, and every breath she took felt like a question. The ribbon hadn't appeared. No signal yet, only darkness and the weight of waiting. She didn't dare sleep, though her eyes begged for rest. Her thoughts were restless anyway, too tangled to let her drift. What had Mirwin meant by, I've done this before? Had she sent others into hiding like this? How many women had passed through these same woods, clutching small pouches, hoping not to be seen? Alice didn't know, but suddenly she didn't feel like the first, or the only. She pressed the pouch to her chest. The leather was soft from age, tied with a bit of faded cord. After hours of sitting still, curiosity finally overtook fear. Slowly, with hands that trembled from cold and nerves, she untied the string and opened it. Inside were dried herbs, a few bits of bark, and a tightly folded piece of cloth. Alice unwrapped it, expecting instructions or a message. Instead, she found a drawing, simple, inked by hand. A tree with bare roots, a line of stars above it, and a small figure standing at the base. Beneath it, in careful lettering, was a phrase. We are not alone. Alice stared at it. The words were quiet but powerful. Not alone, not forgotten, not helpless. She folded the cloth again and tucked it back inside. Whatever this was, whoever Mirwin had helped before, there were others. And that gave her strength, even as the chill crept up her arms. As dawn stretched its pale fingers across the sky, the forest began to stir. Birds chirped softly, and a mist rose from the stream in delicate threads. Alice rubbed her arms and stood to stretch, her eyes scanning the woods for any movement. And then, just as the morning sun caught the tops of the trees, she saw it, a red ribbon fluttering gently in the breeze, tied around a tall oak further down the stream. Her breath caught. This was it, the signal. She moved carefully, every step deliberate. Her legs were stiff, her back sore, but she didn't stop. When she reached the ribbon, she touched it to make sure it was real, then turned to follow the faint trail leading uphill. The path twisted through underbrush and led her to a low stone wall, half covered in moss. Beyond it was a small clearing, and in the middle, another cottage smaller than Mirwin's and nearly hidden by trees. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. It looked abandoned, but the door creaked open before she even reached it. A young woman stood there. She was about Alice's age, maybe slightly older, with long dark hair braided down her back. She didn't smile, but her eyes were kind. "You're Alice," the girl said simply. Alice nodded. "How did you?" "Mirwin sent word before they came," the girl replied. She knew they would. Alice stepped inside. The cottage was quiet, filled with the scent of lavender and dried mint. A single bed sat in the corner, blankets neatly folded. Shelves lined the walls, holding jars of herbs, oils, and tiny bundles tied with twine. "Amita," the girl said, "you're safe here. For now." Alice let the warmth settle around her. "Is my sister safe?" Ida's face tightened. "Still in the tower. But you weren't followed. That's something." Alice sat down on the edge of the bed. "Why are they doing this? What do they want?" "They want control," Ida said softly. "And fear gives them that. They don't understand women like Mirwin, or women like you. So they name it danger. Heresy. Witchcraft. But I'm not a witch," Alice said. "Neither is she," Ida replied. "Knowing how to care for the sick isn't witchcraft. Listening to the forest, learning from plants, remembering the old stories, that isn't evil. It's survival. It's history." Alice looked around the cottage. "How long have you been hiding?" Ida gave a small shrug. "2 winters now, after they came for my aunt." "Did she survive?" "No," Ida said quietly. "But I did." They sat in silence for a moment. Alice's thoughts turned again to her sister, trapped, scared, alone. The longer she stayed in that tower, the more likely they were to turn her into a symbol. A warning. That's what this was about. Not justice. Not even the herbs. It was about power. Ida stood and handed Alice a bowl of broth. "Eat. Then we'll talk about what comes next." The broth was thin but warm, and Alice hadn't realized how hungry she was. She sipped slowly, feeling strength return to her limbs. When the bowl was empty, Ida leaned in. "You're not the first girl they've tried to silence, and you won't be the last. But if we're careful, if we stay together, we can do more than survive. We can make them stop." "How?" Alice asked. "They have guards, a steward, a nobleman behind them. And we have each other," Ida said. "There are more of us. In other villages. In towns. Even in the manor." Alice's eyes widened. "In the manor?" Ida nodded. "Not everyone agrees with what the steward does. Some of the kitchen workers, a few maids, even the Lady Sabina. They know something's wrong, and they're watching." Alice thought of the noblewoman again. Her calm voice. Her subtle warnings. Maybe she'd been offering more help than she could risk saying out loud. Ida reached under a loose floorboard and pulled out a small bundle. Another pouch, like the one Alice carried, and a piece of parchment with writing. She unfolded it and laid it on the table. A map, rough but clear. It showed the tower, the village, the manor grounds, and paths between them. "We've marked every patrol route, every shift change, when the guards eat, when they sleep. We know the cracks in their walls," Ida said. Alice leaned closer. "You've been planning something." "We're always planning something," Ida replied. "We don't get to stop." Alice traced a path with her finger. "If we got to the tower, if I could speak to Lena." Ida looked at her carefully. "You'd be risking everything." "She's my sister," Alice said. "I have to try." Ida nodded once, then folded the map and placed it back in the bundle. "Then we planned carefully. No one gets caught. Not again." Outside, the forest whispered on. The morning sun had risen fully now, but the warmth didn't reach the shadows. Something bigger had begun, something ancient and quiet, passed from woman to woman, voice to voice. Not with swords, not with fire, but with memory, with choice. Alice sat back, her hands still trembling slightly, but her breath was steadier. She wasn't ready, not completely, but she didn't need to be, because she was no longer alone. That night, sleep came in short bursts, shallow and uneasy. Every sound outside, wind brushing through the trees, the soft snap of a twig, sent Alice's heart racing. Ida sat near the window, eyes wide open, watching the dark as if it might speak. A small oil lamp flickered on the table, casting long shadows on the walls. Neither of them said much. There wasn't anything to say that hadn't already been whispered in fear or burned into memory. Alice lay on the cot, staring at the low beams overhead. "Did they ever come here?" she asked quietly. Ida didn't look away from the window. Twice. Once during a snowstorm, when they thought no one would be watching, and again when a child in the village fell ill. They don't like us, but they need us. That's the part they never say. Alice closed her eyes. That strange contradiction had always followed Mirwin too. People feared her, gossiped about her, warned their children to avoid her door. Yet, when someone was dying or desperate, they always came knocking. And then afterward, they would go back to pretending she was dangerous. It was safer, somehow, to pretend she was unnatural than to admit she was essential. "Have you ever seen the inside of the tower?" Alice asked. "Once," Ida said after a pause. "I was too young to understand it. My aunt brought herbs for a woman who had been locked up. She was accused of curses because her husband's crops failed. The steward allowed a visit. Just one. The room was small. No window. Damp." Alice shivered. "Lena's in there now. She's strong," Ida said. "And she has you." But what could she really do? Alice had no title, no land, no voice anyone at the manor wanted to hear. All she had were questions, and now the map. She rose from the bed and joined Ida at the window. A pale moon hung above the trees, broken slightly by drifting clouds. Somewhere in the village, others slept soundly, unaware of the plan building in the woods. "Tomorrow night," Ida said, "we go back. Not all the way to the tower. Just close enough to see if the guard has changed. We'll watch, we'll listen. And if Sabina is still on our side." "She is," Alice said softly, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring Ida or herself. The next day moved slowly. Ida showed Alice how to blend herbs without drawing attention, how to fold leaves for wounds, and how to make small remedies that could pass for nothing more than harmless kitchen supplies. "It's not just about healing," Ida explained. "It's about hiding the healing in plain sight." They ate sparingly, moved quietly, and avoided making smoke. Every sign of life could lead curious eyes their way. In the afternoon, a knock came at the door. Both girls froze. Alice's breath caught in her throat. Ida motioned for silence and pressed her ear against the wood. "It's me," came a voice, a whisper barely louder than the wind. From the manor. Ida hesitated, then slowly unbarred the door. A boy stepped inside, no more than 13, with shaggy brown hair and nervous eyes. He wore the plain tunic of a servant. Alice recognized him. He had been in the manor's kitchen when she went to see the steward, carrying baskets, always silent. He handed Ida a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "From Lady Sabina," he said, then turned to leave. "Wait," Alice said. "Do you know my sister?" The boy looked at her, uncertain. Then he gave a tiny nod. "She's okay. Scared, but not hurt." Alice swallowed the knot in her throat. "Thank you." He disappeared into the woods, quick and silent. Ida unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a folded piece of parchment and a small blue ribbon. The note was short. "Patrol week on West Wall. Tower key held by Garen, second watch. Window shutter loose, north side. 3 nights from now. I'll make sure he's on duty. Asterisk asterisk. S." They read it twice, then again, as if the words might vanish. Alice could barely believe it. A weakness, a chance, a quiet promise from within the very place that held her sister. Ida tucked the note into a hollowed-out book and hid it beneath a loose board. We can't act too soon, but we prepare. We practice. Practice? Alice asked. You'll need to move quickly, quietly, without stumbling. And if you're caught, Ida didn't finish the sentence. Alice nodded. I'll be ready. That evening, they followed the stream again, this time turning west through a thicket of thorn and ash. Ida led her to a cluster of stones, a place with just enough cover to watch the manor's edge without being seen. From there, they could see the tower in the distance. It wasn't tall, just 2 stories high, with narrow slits for windows. It looked harmless from here, like part of the landscape. But Alice knew the truth. A figure passed by the tower, one of the guards' heavy steps yawning. Then another, and a third, younger and slower. That one, Ida said, was Garen. They watched until the sun dipped below the hills and the moon returned. Alice memorized the pattern of the guards, the pace of their walk, even the way they leaned when they grew bored. Back at the cottage, Ida rolled up bits of cloth to practice silent steps. She taught Alice how to stay low, how to breathe shallow when hiding, how to move without drawing attention. You're not running through the woods, she said. You're weaving through danger. The days passed. On the second night, the boy returned again with a fresh note. Fewer words this time. One more day. Window unlocked. Be ready. Asterisk, asterisk. That night, Alice didn't sleep. She sat by the fire, thinking of her sister, of how they used to whisper about far-off places, dream of seeing markets and towers and towns beyond the village fields. Lena was gentle, kind. She didn't deserve this. None of them did. When dawn came, Alice stepped outside and felt the morning air press against her skin. Everything was quiet, still, a strange calm before something unknown. By sundown, she would have to move, and by the next morning, everything would either be changed or lost. As the final light of day slipped behind the trees, Alice knelt by the stream and cupped the cool water in her hands, letting it run over her fingers. She felt every drop like it carried weight. Tonight, everything would change, or at least it had to. She wiped her palms dry on her skirt and stood, heart already thudding in her chest, the kind of rhythm that comes before something you can't turn back from. Back inside the cottage, Ida was ready. She'd packed 2 small bundles, one for Alice and one for herself. Each held dried meat, a piece of hard bread, a wrap cloth of herbs, and a flint stone. No extras, nothing unnecessary. They were dressed in dark wool, cloaks fastened tight, no embroidery or bright trim. Just shadows, dressed as people. Ida handed Alice a small curved knife. Only if you must, she said. We're not here to fight. Alice nodded and slid it into the inside of her belt. We're here for her. Ida led the way through the woods, weaving through familiar trees, keeping low where the moonlight touched the ground. The path curved and narrowed until the slope dropped toward the open fields near the manor. They stopped beneath a dense patch of yew, crouched among the roots, and waited. Below them, the manor house stood quiet and wide, windows flickering with firelight. The tower stood to the side like an afterthought, its stone walls gray-blue in the moonlight. 2 guards were visible, one by the gate, the other pacing near the garden wall. No others yet. Not Garen. Ida tapped Alice's arm and pointed. A figure had appeared on the far side of the tower. He was young, slouched, dragging his spear behind him. Alice recognized the lazy step. Garen. Second watch. They waited, watching him circle, letting him grow bored again, just as Lady Sabina had promised. And when he rounded the corner and vanished out of sight, they moved. They crossed the field like ghosts. Alice's feet barely made sound. Her heart beat louder than her footsteps. Every breath she took, she counted. 4 to inhale, 4 to hold, 4 to release. It steadied her. They reached the stone base of the tower and flattened themselves against the wall. The shuttered window, high but not too high, was slightly ajar. Just as the message said. Ida knelt, laced her fingers together, and nodded. Alice stepped into her hands, and Ida lifted. She climbed slowly, finding cracks in a mortar, using the wooden frame of the shutter as a grip. Her fingers slipped once, but caught again. The window creaked as she pushed it wider and slipped inside. The air in the tower was damp and stale. She landed softly on the floor and waited in the dark. No sound, no guards inside, just the distant creak of footsteps outside. Alice crept forward, past a table and a wooden bench, and down a short hall. There were 3 doors. One open, empty, the second barred. She listened, held her breath, and then heard it. A cough. Faint, tired, familiar. "Lena," she whispered. A pause. Then Alice. She nearly collapsed. The voice was smaller than she remembered, but it was hers. She rushed to the door, feeling along the iron latch. No keyhole from this side, just a pin. She reached in her belt, pulled a thin sliver of metal Ida had given her earlier, and slid it between the wood and the pin. It took 3 tries. Then a soft click. The door creaked open, and there she was. Lena, pale, eyes swollen but alive. Alice caught her sister in her arms and pulled her close. "We have to go," she whispered. "Now." Lena didn't question it. She just nodded and clung to her. Together, they moved back through the hallway, careful, slow. When they reached the window, Alice leaned out. Ida was there, waiting. "I've got her," Alice whispered. Ida nodded and climbed up silently to help. She took Lena first, guiding her through the window and lowering her down the wall. Alice followed, heart in her throat. When her feet hit the ground again, she grabbed Lena's hand, and the 3 of them vanished into the tall grass. They didn't speak, didn't breathe too loud, just ran, quiet and fast, back into the woods. Behind them, a voice called out. "Did you hear that?" A torch flared. "Hey, the tower." But by the time the guards reached the base of the wall, they were gone. They didn't stop running until the trees were thick around them again, until the stream was beside them, and the wind had swallowed their trail. They paused under a large oak, breathing hard. Alice hugged Lena again and looked in her face. "You're safe now," she said, voice shaking. Lena tried to speak, but tears came first. Ida handed her a water flask and wrapped her in an extra shawl. "We need to keep moving," Ida said gently. "They'll send riders by morning." Alice nodded. She knew what came next. This wasn't the end. This was just the first step. They followed the stream north, where the trees grew denser and fewer people lived. Ida had spoken of another safe house, farther out, near the hills, where old paths twisted into the wild. If they could reach it, they'd have time. Time to heal. Time to think. Maybe time to plan something more. As they walked, Lena clutched Alice's hand. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered. "You will," Alice said. "You will, every day now." Behind them, the night stayed quiet. But the fear didn't fade, because they knew too much. And the ones in power, they feared that knowledge most of all. And in a world that punished women simply for remembering too much, for knowing the wrong plants or asking the wrong questions, survival was no longer enough. Now it was time to begin something more. Something that would stretch further than their village. Further than the steward. Something that couldn't be buried or forgotten. Something that began in the silence, but wouldn't stay quiet for long. They walked through most of the night, keeping close to the stream, stopping only when Lena's legs could no longer carry her. Ida led them to a low ridge beneath a cluster of old trees, the roots so thick they created hollows in the ground. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rest for a while without being seen. The wind had picked up, bringing with it the scent of pine and damp earth, and the night sounds grew quieter, as if the forest itself was listening. Alice sat beside Lena, wrapping her sister in a blanket while Ida lit a small, hidden flame beneath a flat stone. It was barely enough to warm their hands, but it was safer than building anything brighter. Every decision now had to be quiet, careful, intentional. Lena leaned her head against Alice's shoulder. "I still don't understand," she said, her voice soft, hoarse. "Why did they take me? What did I do?" Alice didn't know how to answer. She wanted to say it was a mistake, that it had all been a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. The truth was harder and heavier. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered. "You just knew things, asked things, and they didn't like that." Lena closed her eyes. "I thought learning to help others would be enough. That if I didn't speak out, if I stayed quiet, they'd leave me alone." Ida looked over from the fire. "They always say they want quiet women, but what they really want is obedient ones. Not quiet, silent, The words lingered in the air, more honest than anything Alice had heard from a nobleman or steward. She had felt it her whole life. Women expected to kneel, to serve, to accept what was handed to them and question nothing. If you stepped outside of that shape, whether by knowledge, by courage, or simply by presence, you became a problem. Alice remembered their mother once saying, "Asterisk, there are two kinds of trouble for women, the kind they choose and the kind they're born into. Best to know the difference early." Asterisk at the time, Alice hadn't understood. Now she did. "We'll go to the hills," Edith said after a moment. "There's an old place there, built into stone, hidden behind bramble. A few of us have used it before. It's not much, but it's ours." "How far?" Alice asked. "A full day's walk, maybe more," Ida replied. "If we're careful." They slept in shifts, Ida watching first, then Alice. The forest wrapped itself around them like a shield, and the cold settled into their bones, but none of them complained. They had something that mattered more than comfort now: freedom. Even if it was fragile, even if it came with fear, it was still real. By morning, they set out again, moving slower now, letting Lena rest when she needed. The path to the hills was winding and overgrown. Alice had never walked it before. Few had. These were the kinds of places that didn't appear on village maps, that weren't spoken of in front of men. Places passed down in stories, from one woman's whisper to another. As they climbed, the forest changed. The trees grew taller, the light dimmer, the ground soft with years of fallen leaves. Birds flitted through the canopy, and occasionally a deer would dart across the path. But no humans, no voices, no soldiers. It felt like a world apart. When they stopped to drink, Ida handed Alice a folded parchment. "It's a list," she explained. "Names of women like us. Some from your village, some from others." Alice opened it and stared at the words. Over 20 names, each written in a careful hand. Some she recognized. An older widow who'd once helped deliver a baby in secret, a quiet weaver who always had a stash of healing roots in her apron. Others were strangers. "They've all had someone taken," Edith said, "or questioned, or watched." Alice looked up. "You've been keeping track?" "We all have," she said. "This didn't start with you or Elena. It started long ago. We just kept hoping it would stop on its own." Alice folded the parchment and tucked it into her cloak. "And now we stop hoping," Edith said, "and start building." By late afternoon, they reached the edge of a rocky slope. Thorn bushes grew thick along one side, but Ida pushed through them with practiced hands, revealing a narrow path that wound down between two jagged stones. "Watch your step," she warned. "The ground's loose." They followed her down, and as they turned the last bend, the shelter came into view. It wasn't much, a stone structure, half covered in moss, built into the side of the hill, but it was dry, hidden, and quiet. Inside, the space was small but warm. A hearth stood at the center, and someone had already left a stack of dried wood tucked beneath a shelf. Clay pots lined the walls, and a thick wool curtain hung near the back, separating a sleeping area from the front. Ida smiled faintly. "Welcome to the hollow." Alice helped Lena inside and sat her near the fire. As Ida lit the hearth and warmth began to fill the room, Alice felt something inside her settle. It wasn't peace, but it was the beginning of one. That evening, while Lena rested, Ida showed Alice a cloth map etched with charcoal. "There are more places like this," she explained. "Small, hidden shelters, and more women who are done waiting." Alice traced the lines with her finger. "You're building something, aren't you?" "We all are," Ida said. "Not an army, not a rebellion. Something quieter, stronger. A web," Alice said softly. "Yes," Ida nodded. "A web of women who see, who remember, who will no longer ask permission to exist." Alice thought of Mirwin, of Sabina, of her mother, women who had carried knowledge in silence for generations. And now, the silence was ending, not with loud declarations, but with footsteps in the woods, with herbs passed hand to hand, with secrets turned into stories, and stories turned into truth. As night fell and stars began to dot the sky above the hills, Alice sat at the doorway and listened to the wind. The village would wake tomorrow and realize she was gone. The steward might tighten his grip. Sabina would have to stay cautious. But here, for now, the forest held her. She was no longer the girl who waited to be told what to do. She was becoming something else. And whatever came next, she would face it, step by step, breath by breath, with the quiet courage that had always lived beneath her fear. Not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been forced to live small in a world too afraid of what she might become. By the next morning, the forest around the hollow felt heavier, like it knew something had shifted. Birds called out in short bursts, not the long melodies they usually sang at dawn. Alice stepped outside before sunrise, her boots wet with dew, and watched the mist roll across the hills. She held the parchment of names Ida had given her the night before and felt the weight of it. Not just the ink and paper, but the lives it held, the silence it recorded. Inside the shelter, Lena stirred restlessly in her sleep. Ida had given her a calming mixture, something mild, just enough to help her body recover. But the fear didn't leave with the fever. It settled deeper in memories and silence. Alice knew the feeling too well now. Later that day, as Ida prepared dried roots for storage, Alice noticed she moved more carefully than usual, glancing at the doorway too often. Something had changed in her, too. Someone was here, Ida said finally, without looking up. Last night. Alice froze. Here. Not inside, Ida replied, but close. Footprints in the slope above the spring. Light ones. Whoever it was knew how to move quiet. Alice's stomach sank. Do you think they followed us? No, Edith said, shaking her head. If they had, they'd have come straight for the door. This felt like a scout. Someone searching, but not sure what they were looking for. Could it be Sabina's people? Ida looked doubtful. Maybe, but I'd rather assume otherwise. They reinforced the shelter that day, stacking more brush in front of the narrow path, placing flat stones to cover signs of movement. Ida handed Alice a pouch of dried berries and a small whistle carved from bone. If we're separated, she said, 2 short bursts, then 1 long. That means meet at the base of the stone ridge. Alice tucked it beneath her collar. The longer they stayed hidden, the more she understood what survival really meant. It wasn't just escaping the tower. It was keeping ahead of a world built to pull you back in. That night, as Lena slept again, Alice found herself staring at the parchment with a list of women's names. She ran her fingers over them, one by one. Then something caught her eye, halfway down the page, written smaller than the others. Judah, a name she hadn't heard in years. Judah had been her mother's friend. She used to visit late in the evenings when Alice was small. They whispered in the back room while the children played outside. Then one spring, she disappeared. No one said why, only that the road took her. Alice looked up. Ida, this name. Judah. Do you know her? Ida nodded slowly. She helped map the first safe paths, the ones used during the last sweep. She taught us how to hide from search dogs. But she's not dead. She's alive. Last we heard, yes. Living near the stone mines. Pretending to be a widow. We haven't sent word in a long time. Alice folded the parchment. Can we? Ida hesitated. It's risky, but if things are moving again, she should know. The next day, they prepared a message. Nothing that could be understood if intercepted. Just a coded phrase, hidden in a recipe for bread. A woman near the outer market, a friend of a friend, would carry it. The message would pass hands 3 times before it reached Judah, if she was still alive to read it. Meanwhile, rumors from the village began to trickle in through the forest paths. A boy from a nearby farm stopped to leave a bundle of food under a stone and whispered as he dropped it. They say you kidnapped your sister, he said, that you poisoned the tower guard with root water, and that the steward is raising a reward. Alice said nothing. She just took the bundle and gave him a nod. But the words stayed in her chest like stones. Lies spread faster than truth, and the further they spread, the harder it became to breathe. Ida was quiet that night. They sat in front of the low fire, no food cooking, no stories shared. You know what they'll do, she said eventually, eyes on the flames. If they can't find you, they'll take someone else. Someone easy. Who? Alice asked, even though she already knew. Your brothers, Ida replied. Or Mirwin, or anyone they think helped you. Alice swallowed hard. Then we go back. No, Ida said. Not yet. That's what they want. You walk back in, and they put you in the square. Like a trophy. No, we have to be smarter. But I can't leave them to pay the price for what I did, Alice said. You didn't do anything wrong. Edith snapped. They did. Don't forget that. The fire popped, breaking the silence between them. Lena stirred from the sleeping mat and blinked at them, her face pale in the firelight. I heard voices, she said, in the tower. The night before I left. Alice leaned closer. What kind of voices? Not guards, Lena said. 2 women. One sounded like Sabina. But the other, she called her Lady Riva. Ida's brow furrowed. Riva? That name hasn't been spoken in a decade. Alice looked between them. Who is she? She was a noblewoman. Higher than Sabina. Left the court suddenly years ago. Rumors said she practiced the old rites. That she had books they burned. And she was there? Alice asked. I think so, Lena said. They were talking low. Something about preserving the web. Then they stopped when they heard the guard. Ida stood. If Riva is back, this goes deeper than we thought. That night, Alice couldn't sleep. Her mind spiraled with questions. If Lady Riva had returned, and if she was working quietly with Sabina, that meant some noble women were still carrying the web too. The same web Mirwin had protected. The same one Ida now mapped in secret. But if those women were helping behind closed doors, why did they let others suffer? Why did they let Lena be taken? The next morning, another bundle arrived under the stone. This time, it held not only food, but a sealed scrap of parchment. Alice unfolded it. The writing was rushed. They've taken Mirwin. She did not resist. Said to tell you, I have done this before. The steward rides north. Be ready, asterisk asterisk. The message was unsigned, but Alice didn't need a name. She closed her eyes, heart pounding. It had begun again. Only now, she was not the girl hiding behind others. Now she would stand, not alone, but side by side with every woman who remembered what silence had cost them. The air grew colder that evening, as if the forest itself was bracing for what came next. Alice stood by the stream, gripping the parchment until her knuckles turned white. They've taken Mirwin. The words echoed like thunder in her chest. Even now, Mirwin had given herself over without struggle, just like she had for others. It was her way, always thinking 2 steps ahead, always protecting the web, no matter the cost. But Alice couldn't shake the feeling that something about this was different, more dangerous, and more deliberate. Behind her, Ida sat on a low stump, sharpening the edge of a small blade with slow, even strokes. She hadn't spoken since reading the message. Not a single word, just quiet tension, carved into every movement. The flames in the hearth burned low, casting shadows against the rock walls. Lena watched them both from her bedroll, hugging her knees to her chest. She knew they would come. Ida finally said. Her voice was steady, but low. That's why she gave you the pouch. Why she told you to run. Alice nodded. But she never told me what they really wanted. They never want just one thing, Ida replied. They want obedience. They want silence. But most of all, they want to control the story. And the women who remember too much? We ruin that. Alice looked down at the pouch, still tied at her side. It felt heavier now, like it carried not just herbs, but history. Quiet, hidden history passed down from hand to hand, woman to woman. She thought of the drawing inside, the tree with its bare roots and the stars above it. We are not alone. Those words had once felt like comfort. Now, they felt like a warning. They're going to make an example of her, Ida said, just like they planned to with Lena. Alice's breath caught. Then we can't let them. We won't, Ida said, but we don't run into the fire. We bend the wind. That's how the web survives. Alice turned to her sister. Do you remember anything else from the tower? Anything they said? Lena nodded slowly. Only fragments. They talked about a gathering. Something called the Ember Circle. Sabina said it had been awakened. The other woman, Riva, maybe, she said, the old rites must not be lost again. Ida's eyes sharpened. The Ember Circle was part of the first network. Before the purges. Before the trials. I thought that was just a story, Alice said. It was a real group. Noble women, midwives, even merchant wives. They met in secret. Past coded messages protected one another. When a new steward came to power, he labeled them all heretics. Most vanished. But if Riva is reviving it, then they're organizing again, Alice whispered. Ida stood, rolling the blade into a cloth. If that's true, we have to find them. And we need to move before the steward parades Mirwin through the village. Alice nodded. How do we find them? Sabina, Ida said. She's still the link. And now she knows we're listening. That night, Alice barely slept. She kept waking to the sound of wind rustling through branches, the flap of an owl's wings, the creak of the cottage settling. Her thoughts churned. Mirwin's calm goodbye, Sabina's quiet warnings, the ancient map etched in charcoal. Pieces of something larger than she'd ever understood. She wasn't just escaping anymore. She was stepping into something old, something dangerous. At dawn, Ida laid the next part of the plan before them. They would go to a different hollow, an abandoned weaving barn farther east, near the edge of the manor lands. It was where messages from the Ember Circle used to be exchanged. If anyone still used it, Sabina would know. And Sabina had a habit of leaving signals in plain sight. They packed light, only what they could carry on foot. Dried food, the map, a handful of healing poultices, and 2 cloaks wrapped in soot-stained linen. Ida rubbed ash across the seams of their clothes, dulling any shine. We need to look like travelers, she said, not women being hunted. The forest seemed restless as they moved through it. Wind shifting more than usual, birds going silent too quickly. Every sound felt louder now. Every branch snapped, every footfall. The steward's men were searching. That much was certain. But they weren't just searching for fugitives. They were hunting a threat to their authority, something invisible but dangerous. The web. By late afternoon, they reached the weaving barn. It was half collapsed, with vines growing through the broken windows and moss along the rafters. The stone hearth inside was cold and cracked, but still solid. Ida moved straight to the back wall and pulled loose a brick. Behind it was a space just big enough to fit a scroll. Empty. No message, she said, frowning. But someone's been here. Recently. How do you know? Alice asked. There's a scratch on the stone. That wasn't their last time. It's a code. A sign that says, watched. Not safe. They left quickly, moving deeper into the forest until they reached a circle of tall trees, a grove hidden between 3 hills. It was quiet there, almost unnaturally so. Lena finally broke the silence. What if we never find them? What if they've given up? They haven't, Alice said. They left us too many signs. They wouldn't do that if they planned to disappear. Ida nodded. They're watching, waiting to see if we're worth revealing themselves to. Alice looked at the parchment again, the list of names. At the very bottom, a final name had been added in a different hand. Alice of Greyhill. She hadn't noticed it before. She showed it to Ida, her voice barely above a whisper. Someone added my name. Ida's eyes darkened. That means they've seen you. They've accepted you. Accepted me for what? Alice asked. Ida looked at her. To carry the story. To help weave the next strand. That night, they lit a signal fire. Not with flame, but with herbs. A small, controlled smoke, colored with sage and dried violet petals. A message passed only through scent. One that would drift on the breeze, reach the right eyes, the right noses. Then they waited, and as the night deepened and the fire cooled to soft embers, Alice thought again of Mirwin, standing tall even as they dragged her away. She wasn't just buying them time. She was making a statement. Now, it was Alice's turn to answer. Not with shouting, not with a sword, but with memory, with movement, with quiet rebellion whispered through roots, through stars, through every woman who refused to vanish. And somewhere beyond the trees, someone was watching, waiting to see what Alice would do next. The next morning arrived slowly, carried in on a breeze that smelled like damp earth and smoke. Alice woke first. She didn't move right away. She just lay still, watching the gray light push through the canopy above. Lena and Ida were still asleep, breathing in rhythm, their faces pale but calm. For a brief moment, the world felt still. But that stillness was a lie, one that hung in the air like mist before a storm. She stood and stepped quietly out of the grove. The fire had gone out during the night, leaving only a circle of ash and blackened herbs. The scent still clung to her clothes. Violet, sage, and something sharper. It was a calling card, not just to Sabina, not just to the Ember Circle, but to anyone who remembered the old ways. Anyone still watching. A crow cried out in the distance. Ida stirred a few moments later and joined her at the edge of the trees. She didn't speak right away, only looked out across the hill where the early fog rolled low and soft, like a sleeping animal. "They'll answer soon," she said at last. Alice nodded, though the weight in her chest didn't ease. "What if they don't? Then we do what they did," Edith said. "We keep moving. We keep surviving. And we find the next one." They made a slow breakfast of soaked oats and boiled leaves, adding a little salt Lena had tucked into her pouch. Every bite was measured, every movement quiet. Alice kept glancing toward the trees, expecting a figure to emerge. A signal. Something. It came just before midday. A flash of fabric, gray and deep red, fluttered from a branch near the top of the slope. Alice saw it first. A strip of ribbon tied deliberately. She pointed, heart racing. Ida stood immediately. "That's them." They packed fast, leaving no trace behind. No ash, no scraps. Even their footprints were brushed away with dried leaves. Then they climbed the slope, one after another, until they reached the ribbon. Pinned beneath the knot was a small wooden token, flat, round, carved with a tree and 5 stars. Alice recognized it from the map Mirwin had once shown her, the same design hidden in the corner. A meeting symbol. They followed the ribbon's direction, moving deeper into unfamiliar trees. The land changed slowly, flatter, rockier. The bark on the trees grew dark and knotted. There was no path, but it felt like one, as if others had walked it once and the forest had simply grown around their memory. After an hour, they reached a clearing. It wasn't wide, just enough space for a circle of standing stones, waist-high and worn with age. Moss covered most of them, but here and there, symbols had been scratched into their faces. Not letters, just shapes, triangles, spirals, threads. Lena stood back, uncertain. "What is this place?" Ida stepped forward slowly. "This is where they used to meet. In the beginning. Will they come here?" Alice asked. "They already have," Ida said, pointing to the dirt between the stones. "Look, footprints. Fresh. 3 different pairs, all adult-sized. One with a limp. One barefoot. They were just here," Alice whispered. "They left us a sign," Edith said, kneeling by the largest stone. She brushed aside a pile of leaves and revealed a small package, wrapped in cloth, tied with twine. Inside was a sealed letter. No name, just the tree and stars on the wax. Ida handed it to Alice. "It's for you." Alice broke the seal with shaking hands and unfolded the parchment. The writing was clean, simple. "You've walked far. Good. The threads have felt your steps. Mirwin is not lost. She is placed. Riva watches. She remembers. If you choose to weave, meet us at the old bell tower before moonrise. Come alone. Tell no one. Asterisk, asterisk." Alice read it twice, then again. Her mind spun with questions, but her hands felt steady. Finally, something was happening. Finally, someone was speaking plainly, even if in riddles. "I have to go," she said. Ida frowned. "Not alone. That's too dangerous." "I know," Alice said, "but they asked me to. They'll never trust us if I don't. We don't know who Riva really is anymore," Ida said, "or what her plan is. She helped Sabina. She left clues. She saved Lena. She also let Mirwin be taken." Alice swallowed. "We don't know that yet." Ida paced the circle, clearly torn. Finally, she stopped. "Go. But take this." She handed Alice the bone whistle. "If anything feels wrong, signal." Alice nodded and tucked it away. "I'll be careful." They walked back toward the edge of the grove, where Ida and Lena would wait. From there, Alice followed the river down until the trees thinned. In the distance, rising above the last stretch of woodland, was the bell tower. It looked abandoned, just as it had for years. Its roof sagged, and ivy crawled up its walls like veins. The wooden stairs inside had half rotted, but they still held weight. Alice climbed them slowly, each step creaking beneath her feet. At the top, the tower opened into a round room with broken glass windows and a rusted bell hanging crooked on its frame. And there, standing in the shadows, was a woman. Tall, cloaked, hood low over her face. Alice didn't speak at first. Neither did the woman. Then the woman stepped into the light, and Alice saw her eyes. Not cruel, not kind, just ancient, like they'd seen too much too fast. "You carry her fire," the woman said. Her voice was low, smooth. "Mirwin's?" Alice blinked. "You're Riva," the woman nodded. "And you're the thread she chose." "Where is she?" Alice asked. "Hidden, not harmed. She chose to be seen so we could move freely again. The steward watches her now, but he sees only what we allow." Alice stepped forward. "Why me?" "Because you ran when you should have knelt. You asked when you were told to forget. And you remembered when others stayed silent." "What do you want from me?" Riva lifted a leather satchel and placed it in Alice's hands. "To deliver this." Alice opened it. Inside were more parchments. Symbols. Names. Maps. "This is the network," Riva said. "The full map. Updated. Every shelter. Every name. If the steward finds this, we all burn." "Why give it to me?" "Because the old ways must pass to new hands. You felt the cost. Now you must choose the burden." Alice looked down at the bag, at the weight it carried. "I'll do it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll carry it." Riva's eyes softened, just for a second. Then she turned toward the broken window and vanished into the shadows again. Alice stood there alone, heart pounding. She held the satchel to her chest. The bell above didn't ring. But something had begun, and it wouldn't stop now. Alice didn't look back as she left the bell tower. The satchel was heavy in her arms, not just with its contents, but with the knowledge of what it meant. Every name, every shelter, every mark etched on those parchments was a lifeline. And if even one of them ended up in the steward's hands, it wouldn't just be her people who paid the price. It would be every woman hiding in silence, every healer, every mother who whispered truth when no one else dared to. The sky was darkening now, clouds stretching low over the trees, thick with the promise of rain. She moved fast through the underbrush, careful not to take the same path twice. Her thoughts raced. Had Riva watched her this whole time? How many of these steps had already been planned? She tried not to let that question sink too deep. Right now, the only thing that mattered was protecting what she carried. When she returned to the grove, Ida stood waiting, knife drawn but low at her side. One look at Alice told her everything. "You saw her," Ida said quietly. "She gave me the map," Alice replied. "Everything." Ida's eyes widened. "She must trust you more than she trusted the last 3 messengers." "She didn't say that," Alice murmured, "but she didn't need to. The web's moving again, and she's not the only one pulling the threads." They spent the next hour packing the hollow. The shelter had served its purpose, but staying longer meant risking exposure. The ribbon signal, the ember smoke, the meeting, all of it could be tracked. Alice folded the map into a bundle of cloth and tied it to her back, beneath her cloak. Lena helped gather the last of their supplies, still silent but steady. As they prepared to leave, Ida handed Alice a second parchment. This one smaller, sealed with the same wax as Riva's letter. "I found it under your bedroll," she said. "Must have been left while we slept." Alice broke the seal. The message was short. "He rides at dusk. She will stand trial by moonlight. You know what must be done. Asterisk, asterisk. No name, no place, just certainty." Alice looked at Ida. "They're bringing Mirwin into the village. Tonight." Ida's face tightened. "Then it's a performance. They want the people to see," Alice said. "To watch what happens when women step out of line." The words felt like stones in her mouth. She couldn't let that happen. Not again. Lena sat by the fire, turning a small twig in her fingers. "Can we stop it?" Alice didn't answer at first. Then she knelt in front of her sister. Not with weapons, but maybe with truth. Ida looked skeptical. "Truth doesn't protect you from blades." "No," Alice said, "but it does something worse to men like him. It embarrasses them. It breaks the hold they have when people start whispering behind their backs. If the steward loses control of the story, he loses control of everything." Ida crossed her arms. "So how do we change the story?" Alice thought of the map, of the women listed there, of the names passed hand to hand, kept alive in secret for years. "We show them the web." That evening, they moved quietly through the forest, keeping low and avoiding open trails. They circled the village from the east, where the barley fields had gone dry. From a ridge above, they could see torchlight gathering around the square. A platform had been built. A rope hung from a frame. Alice felt bile rise in her throat. Mirwin stood on the platform, arms bound, head held high. Her dress was plain. Her hair had been cut, but she was not bowed. She didn't tremble. She stared out at the crowd like she still held the secret to something they'd never understand. The steward stood at her side, his voice rising, but the words didn't carry well through the trees. Even from this distance, Alice could see his discomfort. He expected cheers, fear. Instead, the crowd was quiet. Ida leaned in. "They're waiting for something. They're waiting to see if anyone will stand up," Alice said. And then she stepped forward, down the hill, into the field, toward the light. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She moved like she belonged there. Like this was always the plan. Gasps rose from the edge of the crowd as she passed the last row of homes. Some faces turned. Some stared. Some tried not to look. Alice reached the edge of the square and climbed onto the platform before anyone could stop her. The steward turned in disbelief. "You dare return here?" he growled. Alice didn't flinch. "I dare to speak. Just once." He raised a hand to stop her, but a voice in the crowd called out, "Let her talk." Another followed. "She has a right." The steward's lips tightened, but he stepped back. Alice turned to the people. Her voice wasn't loud at first, but it carried. "You've been told stories about women like us," she began. "You've been told we are dangerous, that we whisper secrets in the dark and poison the minds of others. But you were never told why." The crowd shifted. Eyes met hers. A child clutched their mother's hand. "We know things," she said. "Things passed down, not in books, but in hands and voices. We remember names that were erased. We know the roots that heal and the stories that hold truth. And for that, they fear us." She pulled the parchment from her cloak. The list. "These names," she held it up. "These are your neighbors, your mothers, your sisters, your midwives. They are not criminals. They are the ones who kept you alive when the plague came, who stitched your wounds, who buried your dead with dignity." A murmur ran through the crowd now. Faces turned to one another. Whispers spread. The steward stepped forward. "Enough." But Alice turned to him. "You call it heresy. We call it memory. You call it rebellion. We call it survival. And you hang it from a rope and expect the rest of us to forget." The wind picked up, cold against her skin. She stepped back beside Mirwin. And then someone in the crowd raised a hand. Another, and another. Dozens. Silent, but defiant. The steward's face went pale. Ida watched from the shadows, heart pounding. And Riva, somewhere behind the walls, waiting, would know. The moment had come, but the ending had not. The silence that followed was not empty. It pulsed with meaning. It spread like wildfire. Dozens of villagers stood with their hands raised. Not shouting, not chanting, but still as stone. Some were old. Some were young. Some were women wrapped in plain cloaks and aprons. Some were men who glanced nervously at their neighbors, unsure but unwilling to lower their arms. The message was clear. They were watching. The steward looked from face to face, searching for someone to break the moment. But no one moved, not even the children. A sharp gust of wind blew across the square, lifting the parchment in Alice's hands. She held it tighter. "You think you can turn the village against the crown?" The steward barked, stepping forward again. His voice had lost its bite. It sounded too loud now. "Hollow. These are criminals, traitors. You've poisoned the minds of these people with fairy tales and root water." Alice kept her eyes on him. "What frightens you so much? That we speak to each other? That we remember what others try to erase?" He tried to reach for her, but a guard at the base of the platform hesitated. His hand lingered near his sword, but didn't move. "They know," Alice said, her voice rising, steady and human. "They've seen too much now. They've seen what power does when no one questions it. When one man's fear decides a woman's fate." A voice rang out from the crowd. "She helped my wife give birth when the midwife was too far." Another followed. "She saved my brother when he got sick from the water." More voices joined, each louder than the last. One by one, the crowd spoke, not shouting, but remembering, and that, more than anything, seemed to unravel the steward's grip. He raised his hand to silence them, but his gesture looked small now. His power stretched thin. Behind him, Mirwin watched without a word, her chin lifted, her eyes trained on Alice. She was ready for whatever came next, but even she looked surprised by the shift. The platform that was meant to shame her had become something else entirely. A reckoning. Enough, the steward barked, voice cracking. Seize them both. But no one moved. His guards stood still. One of them, a man with a gray beard and heavy shoulders, lowered his spear. I won't do this, the guard said. Not to her. Another followed suit, and then another, until only the steward stood alone on the platform, his hands twitching, his eyes wide. For a long, stretched moment, he seemed to consider running, but he stayed, frozen in place, as if realizing just how small he had become. Alice turned to the crowd, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely think. She looked down at the parchment in her hands, creased now, corners smudged from her grip, and held it high. This is not rebellion, she said. This is return. Return to the truth. To the knowledge that was never yours to steal. Someone from the crowd moved forward, an older woman, wrapped in a thick shawl. She climbed the first step of the platform, then the second. Slowly, calmly, she took the parchment from Alice's hands and folded it with care. Then she placed it in the small satchel around her neck. I'll remember this, she said, her voice soft but unwavering. And I'll carry it too. Ida emerged then, stepping through the edge of the crowd. Lena followed, just behind her, eyes wide with awe. They pushed through the people to reach the platform, moving quickly. Alice met them halfway down the steps. We have to go, Ida whispered. There's more. A rider was spotted an hour ago, coming from the south. He's not alone. Alice nodded. Let's move. Mirwin's ropes had already been cut by a guard whose hands trembled as he backed away from the platform. He didn't speak, just lowered his eyes and walked into the crowd. With the steward still frozen in place, the four women disappeared into the growing dusk. No one tried to stop them. Some in the crowd even stepped aside, giving them space to pass. And for the first time in days, Alice felt breath in her chest again, tight yes, but real. Not stolen or hidden. Real. As they entered the forest again, the satchel strapped back beneath her cloak, Alice turned once to glance over her shoulder. The bell tower stood in the distance, silhouetted against the purple sky. Still, watching. The web had revealed itself. But the danger hadn't passed. They reached the hollow by midnight. A new one, hidden deeper in the northern forest, close to the river's bend. It was older than the others, half collapsed, but dry. Safe. They built a small fire and passed around what little food they had. Nobody said much at first. Only the fire cracked, and the sounds of the night crept back slowly, as if testing the air for safety. Mirwin sat close beside Alice, her hands still red from the rope burns. You did well, she said quietly. I didn't plan it, Alice whispered back. It just happened. That's how it always happens, Mirwin replied. The web doesn't move because of plans. It moves because we do. Alice looked down at her hands. The same hands that had once stirred soup for the steward's table, that had once picked herbs in silence, wondering if anyone would ever listen to her. Now they trembled, but not from fear, from something else. Readiness. They'll come after us harder now, Edith said, breaking the silence. The steward will report back to the crown. They'll label us traitors, witches, worse. They already did, Alice said. But now, they don't have just one story to tell. And we don't have just one voice, Lena added softly. The whole village saw. Ida nodded slowly. Still, we'll have to move again. The map must be delivered, and it can't fall into the wrong hands. Mirwin reached for Alice's arm. You'll carry it. Alice met her eyes. Are you sure? You were chosen the moment you refused to kneel. They sat like that, quiet, letting the fire die down. Outside, the wind had shifted again. Southbound, carrying stories with it. Of what happened in the square. Of a girl who stood. Of hands raised high not to strike, but to remember. The web had stretched further than ever, and it wasn't done yet. The fire was nearly out when Ida tensed. Her head lifted sharply, and her eyes flicked to the darkness beyond the hollow. Alice felt it too, an unnatural stillness, the kind that didn't belong to any forest at night. Even the wind had paused, holding its breath. Without a word, Ida rose to her feet, crouched low, and moved silently to the entrance of the shelter. She motioned for Alice and Lena to stay still. Mirwin had already drawn a small blade from her boot. Alice's heart began to pound. She reached for the satchel, her fingers wrapping tight around the leather strap. If anyone had followed them here, if anyone had tracked that parchment through the village crowd, it would mean they had a traitor. And worse, it would mean everything they had built was now at risk of unraveling. Ida disappeared into the tree line. For a moment, there was nothing, just a faint sound of branches shifting and Alice's own breath. Then a soft whistle, one short, one long. The signal for caution, not danger. Still, when Ida reappeared, her face was grim. "There's a rider," she said. "Not a guard. A messenger. Alone. Coming from the eastern road. And he's carrying a white flag." Mirwin frowned. "A white flag. Wants to parley," Ida added. "But that's not the part that worries me." Alice stood, clutching the satchel. "What then?" "He's wearing the crest of House Varro." The name sent a chill through the air. House Varro was not part of the steward circle. They were higher. Nobility. The kind that didn't dirty their hands in village trials or forest searches. They moved behind walls and contracts, using power as quietly as poison. If someone from Varro had taken an interest, it meant their small rebellion had caught the attention of people who made kingdoms rise or fall. "What does he want?" Alice asked. Ida shook her head, said he has a message for the girl with a thread. "You." Alice exchanged a look with Mirwin, who nodded slowly. "They know what you carry." "But how?" Alice whispered. "That village platform wasn't just a performance for the people," Ida said. "Someone else was watching." Against her better judgment, Alice agreed to meet the rider, but only with Ida and Mirwin close, hidden among the trees, blades drawn. She walked out to the edge of the clearing where the moonlight spilled across the grass like silver water. The rider waited there, motionless atop a dark gray horse, his white cloak fluttering in the cold wind. He looked too clean for these woods, too untouched. When he saw her, he dismounted slowly and removed his hood. His face was young, no more than 25. Eyes sharp, expression unreadable. "You are Alice of Greyhill?" he asked, voice quiet but firm. "I am," she said, "and I don't accept gifts from snakes." That almost made him smile. Almost. "I come with a warning," he said, "and an offer." Alice crossed her arms. "Why would House Varro care about a village girl and a bag of stories?" "Because you've awakened something we thought was buried," he said. "Because you have the names, and because the web is older than even your guardian believes." He stepped forward, carefully, as if not to startle her. "There is a faction within the house," he said. "Not all of them are like the steward. Some of them, us, have been waiting, watching, for the right moment, for someone who could carry the thread forward." Alice narrowed her eyes. "You expect me to trust you because you claim to be different?" "No," he said. "I expect you to survive, and I'm offering a way for that to happen." He pulled a small scroll from his cloak and handed it to her. Alice didn't reach for it. "What is it?" she asked. "An invitation," he said, "to the inner chambers, to speak directly with the circle of lords. They want to negotiate. They want the map, and they're willing to offer protection in exchange." Alice's breath caught. "Protection," she repeated. "For what price?" "For silence," he said. "For stability. They want you to hand it over quietly, so they can control how it's used. No more trials. No more public hangings. But no more rebellion either." Now she understood. Not protection. Containment. "And if I refuse?" she asked. His face tightened. "Then others will come," he said, "and they won't bring white flags." He mounted his horse again and offered her one last look. "Think carefully," he said. "The next time we meet, I won't be the one asking." He disappeared into the trees as quickly as he had come, leaving only the scroll on the grass between them. Alice didn't touch it. Not yet. She stood frozen, her mind racing. If House Varro was involved, if the Circle of Lords had taken notice, then this was no longer a local rebellion. This was political, national, and it meant the map was more dangerous than she'd imagined. Not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. Knowledge had power, and women carrying that knowledge were now pawns in a game far larger than them. She returned to the shelter, scroll still in hand, and laid it on the floor. "They want the map," she said, "in exchange for our silence." Mirwen's jaw clenched. "Of course they do." Ida didn't speak for a long time. Then she asked, "Will you give it to them?" Alice looked down at the satchel, the worn leather now darkened with her sweat. "No," she said, "because silence is how this all started." Lena leaned forward. "Then what happens now?" Alice drew in a shaky breath. "Now we find the other circles. Now we warn them. If House Varro is trying to swallow the web, we need to make sure it stretches too wide to catch." The air in the shelter felt colder now, not from fear, but from the knowledge that they had crossed another line. The quiet rebellion had become a storm, and the storm was moving fast. The morning brought no comfort. The scroll from the Varro messenger sat untouched on a flat stone near the hearth, like a viper coiled in waiting. No one dared open it. Even its seal, marked with a silver crest none of them recognized, seemed to carry weight, as though reading its contents might tether them to a fate they couldn't escape. Alice sat nearest the fire, staring at the leather satchel that now never left her side. Inside, the map pulsed with silent urgency. Every line on that parchment was a root stretching under centuries of earth. Hidden knowledge, fragile truths, and whispered names that could change everything. But now, more than ever, that knowledge had become a threat. House Varro didn't want to protect the web. They wanted to control it, to tuck it safely under their title and seal, away from any woman bold enough to act without permission. Ida crouched near the doorway, chewing the edge of a dried root. "We need to move," she said. "This hollow isn't safe anymore. If one rider found us, more will follow." Mirwen was sharpening her blade again, slower this time. He wasn't a warning. He was bait. They want Alice to feel cornered, so handing over the map seems like a way out. Alice nodded. "But it's not. It's a cage." Lena shifted nervously. "Then where do we go? We can't just keep running from one grove to another." Alice looked up. "We don't run. We go to the river fort." Ida frowned. "That's too close to the main road." "That's why they won't expect it," Alice said. "And it's where the old healer, Branwen, still lives. Mirwen mentioned her once. She's from one of the original lines." Mirwen gave a faint nod. "Branwen doesn't trust anyone, but she knows the old web. If anyone can decode the second half of that map, it's her." The decision was made quickly. They packed in silence, wrapped their few belongings, and smudged the shelter to leave no scent behind. As they moved through the thick trees, Alice kept touching the satchel at her side, half expecting it to vanish if she wasn't careful. With every step, she felt the weight of something closing in, not just the threat of House Varro, but something else. A deeper shift, like the land itself could feel what they carried. By dusk, they reached the river's bend. The fort wasn't a fortress in the usual sense. It was a crumbling stone structure built into the side of a hill, half swallowed by vines and moss. Most travelers passed it without a second glance, thinking it just another ruin from some forgotten war. But the torchlight flickering faintly inside told them otherwise. They approached slowly. Alice called out first. "We come for Branwen. We come with names." A pause. Then a voice, scratchy and old. "Speak one." Alice didn't hesitate. "Enith, daughter of the Vale, keeper of the South thread." The vines rustled. A door swung open, and a small, weathered woman emerged holding a curved walking stick. Her hair was long and gray, twisted into a braid that ran over one shoulder. Her eyes were sharp, glowing like firelight reflected in a dark well. "You speak it well, girl," Branwen said. "But knowing the name doesn't mean you understand the burden." "I carry the map," Alice replied. Branwen's eyes narrowed. Then the fires lit again. They followed her inside. The walls of the fort were covered in etchings, symbols burned into the stone, spirals, moons, branching lines like veins. The air smelled of crushed herbs and old smoke. Bowls of dried roots lined the shelves. A loom sat untouched in the corner, half woven with black and silver thread. Once seated, Branwen pointed at the satchel. "Show me." Alice opened it slowly, carefully unrolling the map across the flat stones. Branwen didn't speak. She just leaned in and began tracing the lines with her fingers. Every curve, every mark, every name. This map is incomplete, she finally said. Alice blinked. What? It's only one side, Branwen continued. It shows the known shelters, the active threads, the women who've kept the line alive. But there's a second map, a shadow map, carried only by the thread keepers. Alice looked at Mirwen, who shook her head. We never had that copy. It was lost when the Western Hollow fell. Branwen looked up, her voice low. It wasn't lost. It was buried. Where? Ida asked. Branwen hesitated. Under the old cathedral, the one that burned during the first purge. Alice felt her chest tighten. That place is cursed. They said the spirits never left. Branwen nodded, which is exactly why no one goes there. The room went quiet. Only the crackling of a fire in the corner broke the silence. If the second map still exists, Alice asked, what does it show? Branwen tapped the table. It shows why the web was built. The others stared at her. Alice leaned forward. What do you mean? Branwen sat back, eyes glinting in the firelight. You think this rebellion started with a handful of midwives and healers try to protect themselves, but goes deeper. The web was never just about survival. It was a record, a living archive, of something powerful, something ancient. Alice's mind raced. What kind of power? The kind people would kill to hide, Branwen said. The kind they already have. The words hung in the air like smoke. You're not just carrying stories, child. You're carrying proof. Of bloodlines. Of betrayals. Of truths that could bring down more than just a steward. Mirwen's voice was quiet now. The steward's not acting alone. Branwen nodded. He never was. The realization hit like a stone. This wasn't just a matter of trials or burned herbs or hidden women. This was a war of memory. And the map wasn't a symbol. It was a weapon. Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside. Fast. Not hiding. Branwen stood instantly. Go to the back. Now. They scattered, moving toward a narrow hallway as Branwen doused the fire with a cloth. Alice pulled the map tight to her chest. The back wall opened to a passage, a dark tunnel carved into the rock. We'll lead them away, Branwen said. Go. Find a cathedral. Find a rest. But Alice began. Now, Branwen snapped. You're the thread. You don't get to break. Ida shoved open the stone door at the back, and they slipped into the tunnel. The sound of shouting voices rose behind them. Metal clanged. A torch flared. Then darkness swallowed them. The passage was damp, narrow, and winding. Alice's breath echoed off the stone. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she kept moving, one foot in front of the other. Lena's hand found hers in the dark, trembling but strong. They didn't speak. They didn't have to, because now they understood this was no longer about evading capture. It was about revealing the truth before it was buried forever. The tunnel twisted beneath the earth like the root of an old tree, branching and curling in ways that made it impossible to tell how far they had gone. The walls were damp, brushing their shoulders as they moved single file through the dark, guided only by the soft sounds of their footsteps and shallow breathing. Somewhere above them, the echoes of shouting still faintly rang, muffled by layers of stone and soil. But down here, the air was thick with stillness, a silence that felt older than the land itself. Alice led the way, one hand pressed against the cold wall for balance, the other holding the map tight against her chest. The satchel felt like it had doubled in weight since they entered the tunnel. Not physically, but in responsibility. If the second map really existed, and if it was hidden beneath that ruined cathedral, then their journey had just shifted from escape to confrontation. Behind her, Lena walked quietly, her hand lightly brushing Alice's cloak now and then, just to know she was still there. Ida followed last, her blade drawn and ready. None of them spoke for what felt like hours. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. At last, the passage opened into a low chamber. The ceiling dripped with moisture, and ancient beams held the stone from collapsing inward. In the center, a narrow set of stone stairs curved upward, disappearing into the dark. This must lead to the old district, Ida said. Before the fires, this whole network connected the cathedral, the granaries, even the archives. Let's hope it still does, Alice murmured. They climbed cautiously, and eventually, the stairs gave way to a wooden trapdoor. Ida pressed an ear against it, listened, then gently pushed it open. Dust fell as the door creaked upward, revealing the remains of a forgotten storeroom. Cobwebs stretched across shelves. Empty jars lined the walls. The smell of mildew filled the air. They emerged into the room, blinking against the faint gray light spilling through a cracked shutter. The building above them had long been abandoned. Roof half caved in, wooden beams blackened with smoke. Ash still clung to parts of the stone. Alice stepped forward, brushing debris aside. Through a splintered doorway, she could see what was once the central aisle of the old cathedral. Even in ruin, the place had a strange, sacred feel. Tall archways, though crumbling, still stood against the sky. Ivy curled over what remained of the altar. The old pews had collapsed into piles of splintered wood, and moss crept across the floor in patches of green. "This is it," Alice said quietly. "This is where they buried the second map." Lena looked uneasy. "They say the cathedral was cursed after the fire." "Not cursed," Ida replied. "Guarded." Alice moved slowly down the aisle, scanning the floor. There should be a mark, something the others left behind. They searched in silence for several minutes, brushing away rubble and ash, tracing old carvings. Finally, Alice stopped. On the ground near the altar, hidden beneath a broken slab, was a faint symbol etched into the stone, 3 rings interwoven with a line through their center. "The thread mark," she whispered. "This is it." Ida knelt beside her and helped lift the broken slab. Beneath it was a hollowed-out space, carefully concealed. Inside, wrapped in cloth, so old it nearly dissolved in her hands, was a bundle. Alice's heart thudded. She reached in and lifted it out. It was another map, thicker, heavier, rolled tightly with leather cord and sealed with the old sigil, 5 stars beneath a crescent moon. She looked at the others. "This is the other half." Carefully, she broke the seal and unrolled it. But it wasn't just another map. It was a ledger, not just names and shelters, but events, dates, locations of uprisings long erased from records, symbols marking hidden alliances, secret births, assassinations, whole villages that were wiped from history for their loyalty to the threads. It told the truth the crown had buried for generations. This is everything," Alice said in awe. Ida studied the lines, her brow furrowing. "This shows connections to the palace itself. Look at these names. Some of them are nobles." Mirwin's warning echoed in Alice's mind. It goes deeper than the steward. This wasn't just about protecting women or knowledge. This was about exposing the rot at the heart of the kingdom. Proof that the web hadn't just resisted the crown, it had once been a part of it. Suddenly, a crash echoed from outside. A shout followed, then the sound of hooves, fast, urgent, and coming their way. "They found us," Ida said. Lena turned pale. "Ow!" No one saw us come through the tunnel. "They didn't have to," Alice said. "The messenger didn't leave empty-handed. He left a trail." She rolled the second map carefully and tucked it into the satchel with the first. "We need to go. Now." They raced back through the cathedral's ruins, but as they reached the tunnel entrance, another crash shook the building. Dust rained down from the rafters. A figure appeared at the far end of the nave, cloaked in black, silhouetted by the fading light. He wasn't alone. More riders dismounted behind him, swords drawn, cloaks whipping in the wind. Ida raised her blade. "We can't outrun them." Alice's mind raced. "We don't need to outrun them." She reached into the satchel and pulled free a single sheet from the new map. She held it up high, stepping forward. "You want the map?" she shouted. "Then let everyone see what's been hidden." The lead rider hesitated. So did the others. Alice stepped onto a broken pillar and unrolled the parchment. Her voice rose. "This map shows the truth. Of royal bloodlines born from the web. Of alliances your crown swore never existed. You burn women like us to silence that truth, but it still survives. It's right here." Gasps rippled through the soldiers. Some recognized names. Others didn't dare look. The lead rider's jaw clenched. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said. "I understand better than you," Alice answered. "You think I'm one thread? I'm a needle now, and you're afraid of where I might point." The standoff held, every heartbeat like a drum. Behind Alice, Ida and Lena waited, breath shallow, ready to move. Then, out of the trees, a second group emerged, cloaked women, their hoods low, their steps calm. Dozens of them. Some were old, some young. All carried blades, staffs, or pouches of herbs. They had answered the web's call. Riva stepped forward from their ranks, her face half-shadowed. "It's too late to silence her," she said. "Now we speak." The soldiers froze, outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The power had shifted, but the fight wasn't over. Because now, everyone knew what was at stake. The moment stretched like a drawn breath. Wind moved through the broken cathedral, rustling cloaks and loose leaves, as if nature itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The soldiers, still rigid and on edge, looked uncertain. Their swords remained raised, but none stepped forward. The presence of the cloaked women changed everything. They didn't speak, didn't shout, yet their silence carried power. The kind of power that came not from armor or weapons, but from conviction and numbers. Alice stood tall on the crumbled pillar, her hand still gripping the parchment. "You came here to end the story," she said, voice steady but charged. "But what you didn't count on was that the story no longer belongs to you. You can burn papers, silence names, but you can't unwrite the truth." The lead soldier shifted. His gaze darted toward Riva, then back to Alice. He hesitated. "Even if that's true," he said, "do you really believe you can hold this ground against the kingdom?" Riva stepped forward beside Alice, her hood falling back to reveal her face, lined, wise, and unmistakably calm. "We're not holding ground," she said. "We're building it." He looked at her, confused. She nodded at the other women. "You've spent generations trying to tear us down, but you never understood. We're not fighting for thrones or titles. We're keeping memory alive. And now, too many remember. Even your silence won't be enough." Then, something shifted behind the soldiers. Another rider approached fast from the north path, hooves kicking dust into the dying light. The soldiers turned, confused. The rider slowed only as he neared, raising a scroll wrapped in red silk, the royal seal. Alice stepped down from the pillar, heart thudding. The messenger looked worn, sweat covering his brow. Without a word, he handed the scroll to the lead soldier and dismounted. The soldier broke the seal, eyes scanning quickly. His jaw clenched tighter with every line he read. "What is it?" Alice asked. The soldier looked at her, anger flickering across his face. Not at her, but at something else. A command from the capital. An order to withdraw. Ida blinked. "What?" "The steward has been removed from his post," the soldier continued. "His methods have drawn too much attention. The crown wants to quiet things, not provoke rebellion." Riva tilted her head. "And now you're being sent to disappear? Disband. Fall silent. Leave no trace," he said bitterly. "They think by pulling back this will all fade." Alice shook her head. "It won't. The truth is already moving." Still, the soldier didn't lower his weapon. "This doesn't mean we trust you." Riva stepped closer. "And we don't need you to. Trust was never part of the agreement. Only distance." He paused, then finally gave a sharp nod to his men. Slowly, reluctantly, the soldiers lowered their swords and backed away. One by one, they mounted their horses and rode off without another word. Only the lead soldier lingered, casting a long look at Alice before turning and disappearing into the trees. It was over. The threat that had loomed for weeks, the chase through forest and fire, the pressure of the steward's grip, it had broken. The map, the truth it carried, had done what years of whispers hadn't. Alice let out a long, shaking breath. Riva turned to her. "You held the thread well." Alice smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone." Mirwin stepped from the shadows with Lena, both of them wide-eyed but relieved. The web had held. The truth had been spoken, and the world had heard just enough to begin asking questions of its own. As they gathered near the crumbling altar, Riva carefully unrolled the second map once more. "We should copy it," she said. "Spread it. Let the other circles carry it, so it can never be hidden again." Alice nodded, already thinking of names. Healers in the western hills, teachers in the southern reaches, women who had waited too long for someone to say what they'd always known. The truth would not remain hidden now. It would travel in hands, in letters, in songs passed down from mother to daughter. Just as they began marking the map on a fresh cloth, a strange sound broke the calm. A soft scraping, low and metallic, echoing faintly beneath the floor. Everyone froze. Ida drew her blade again. What was that? They all listened. There was again, metal against stone, like something dragging itself beneath them. Riva stepped forward, brows furrowed. There's nothing under this cathedral. No tunnels deeper than the one we came through. But Alice wasn't so sure. She approached the altar again and knelt beside the hollow where the map had been hidden. She tapped the stone below it and heard a hollow echo. Without waiting, she pulled aside the remaining rubble. Beneath was another seal, older, fainter. The markings didn't match anything on either map. This was hidden under the hiding place, she whispered. A secret buried beneath a secret. Riva crouched beside her. We don't know what's down there. We didn't know what was on the map either, Alice said. With Ida and Mirwin's help, they pried open the stone. A narrow shaft led downward, almost like a well, but square and lined with polished bricks. And at the bottom, just visible in the flickering light, was a single wooden chest. Alice climbed down slowly. Her feet hit stone, and she knelt before the chest, heart racing. It was carved with ancient runes, symbols not even Branwen had taught her. She opened it slowly. Inside wasn't gold or weapons. It was a book, a thick, leather-bound volume covered in wax cloth. She lifted it gently. Its pages were handwritten, aged but intact. Alice turned the first few, each one filled with names, yes, but also laws. Edicts, oaths sworn in the old tongue, and a royal seal. This wasn't just a record of the web. It was the original charter, a legal agreement signed generations ago between the ruling crown and the women of the web. A forgotten pact, one that had given the web rights, protection, and sovereignty, before it was broken, before it was erased. Alice stared at it in stunned silence. Riva read over her shoulder. Her voice cracked. This changes everything. It was never rebellion, Alice said. It was betrayal. They broke their own law. Now, they had more than stories. They had proof that the crown had once legitimized the very thing it now called treason. And that proof had survived. The truth had not only returned. It had teeth, and it was about to bite back. Alice climbed back up from the hidden chamber slowly, cradling the book like something living. Her legs trembled, not from exhaustion, but from the quiet realization of what she now held. All eyes were on her as she stepped into the broken light streaming through the collapsed cathedral ceiling. The storm had passed, the soldiers had gone, but the world outside was no longer the same. Riva stepped forward first, her weathered face unreadable. She reached out and touched the edge of the book, running her fingers across the seal embossed in the leather. This, I never imagined it still existed. It's not just a book, Alice said quietly. It's a promise the crown made and then buried. Mirwin peered over her shoulder, reading the old tongue with a slow, careful gaze. These aren't just names or agreements. They're laws, signed and witnessed. A record that the crown once recognized the circles as sovereign, protected, even sacred. Lena knelt beside her, blinking through wide eyes. Then they didn't just forget us. They broke us on purpose. Alice nodded slowly and erased every trace they could find. It explained everything. Why midwives had been hunted. Why healers had been accused. Why knowledge, when carried by women, became a threat. This book proved that long before the fear and the flames, there had been respect. A fragile balance, shattered not by time, but by choice. Ida stood at the back, watching the woods through a narrow break in the stone wall. They'll come for it, she said. Once they realize it wasn't lost. Once they know what you found. They'll deny it first, Riva added. Claim it's forged. Say we faked it, wrote it ourselves. But too many people saw you speak. Too many know what they felt when you held that map in your hand. That can't be undone. Alice looked at the map again, then at the book. We'll need to make copies. Spread them, just like the threads. Not just to the circles, but to the towns, the schools, the farmsteads. To the people who always heard the whispers, but never knew the whole truth. And what about the nobles? Lena asked. The ones whose names are in here. The ones descended from the web? If this gets out, it won't just be the crown that trembles. They should tremble, Riva said sharply. They built their comfort on forgotten bones. But Alice shook her head. It's not about revenge. It's about remembering. This isn't just ours to guard anymore. It's something the whole land has a right to know. She turned the book carefully, opening to the middle where the ink grew darker, less faded. The page was marked with a list of ancient titles, each followed by a sigil, then a signature. One of them made her stop. Beneath the symbol of the crescent moon and stars was a name she recognized, not from any book or tale, but from her own family. Her grandmother's stories, always whispered, always vague, had mentioned her once. Enith, Keeper of the South thread. Her ancestor. The signature was delicate, slanted but strong. It confirmed what she'd suspected, but never said aloud, not even to herself. She came from the line, and the thread had returned to her. Alice stepped forward again and held the book out to Riva. I can't keep this alone, she said. This belongs to all of us. Riva's eyes shone as she took it. Then we share it, and we guard it with more than silence. We guard it with truth. Outside, the wind had shifted again, gentle now but steady, like a signal, like a breath. The women gathered what they could from the cathedral. Ida and Mirwin sealed the hidden chamber, recovering the stone with care. The second map was copied onto linen, then etched again into a wooden plate for travel. Riva began organizing routes, safe paths to circles they'd lost touch with, new places where the message could take root. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting the ruins in gold, the group prepared to leave. But before they did, Alice walked once more to the center of the nave, where so much had happened, and took a quiet moment alone. She looked up at what was left of the roof, the sky peeking through blackened beams, clouds drifting slowly above. Her heart beat with the memory of every name they'd recovered, every woman who had stood before her and spoken truth in a world that tried to silence them. Every thread now stitched into a future they were finally reclaiming. And just as she turned to leave, Lena came running from the edge of the forest, breathless. Someone's coming, she gasped. Alice and the others turned instantly. Ida moved to block the trail, her hand already on her blade. Riva motioned for the maps to be hidden, the book to be covered. But Lena shook her head. It's not soldiers. It's a carriage. They waited, and sure enough, a modest carriage appeared moments later, escorted not by soldiers, but by a single rider in dark blue robes, unmarked, unarmed. The carriage stopped near the edge of the ruined square. From it stepped a woman, her hair silver, her gown dusted with travel. Her face was calm, unreadable. Riva's eyes narrowed. She's from the capital. Alice stepped forward slowly. Who are you? The woman gave a small bow. My name is Thera. I'm an archivist to the royal court. Or I was, until I began asking questions. The women remained still. Thera looked directly at Alice. I know what you carry. I've read the records that remain, buried deep in stone, shelves no one visits anymore. I believe what you found, and I've come not to stop you, but to join you. Silence. Even Riva looked unsure. Thera continued, voice low and steady. There are others like me. Women in the archives, the courts, even in the schools of the capital. We've waited in silence for someone brave enough to reignite the thread. You've done that, and now we want to help you protect it. Alice searched her face. There was no arrogance in Thera's voice. No threat, only quiet urgency. Why now? Alice asked. Why not speak sooner? Thera smiled faintly. Because until today, I didn't know if anyone would listen. Riva stepped forward and studied the woman for a long time. Then finally, she nodded. If you're telling the truth, you'll carry a copy of the map back with you. But not to the palace. To the people. Quietly. One family at a time. I will, Thera said. And with that, the final thread was stitched. Not with a shout, but with a choice. The circle widened, and the web, once torn and buried, was rising again, alive, unbroken, and reaching farther than ever before. The sun had fully dipped behind the hills by the time they began walking again, moving slowly through the woods as dusk folded into night. There was no need to rush now. For the first time in weeks, the threat wasn't closing in behind them. The weight they carried hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It no longer felt like something they had to hide. It felt like something they were meant to share. Alice walked near the front, the leather satchel slung across her chest, now holding both the original map and its matching half. The ancient book, too, was carefully wrapped and cradled in Riva's arms. They had given a copy of the second map to Thera, along with one of the translated pages from book. She had promised to disappear into the capital, to find others like her, and to do the work quietly, thread by thread, household by household. The circles were no longer alone. The truth was spreading now, far beyond their forest and ruins. Lena walked beside Alice, still quiet, still young, but different, stronger. She had seen what they all had seen, how much had been kept from them. Not just stories, but rights, names, and history. She had helped guard it, even when afraid. Alice noticed how she no longer looked down when others spoke. She met their eyes now, and when she laughed, it wasn't nervous anymore. Ida and Mirwin had taken the rear, making sure they weren't followed, still cautious even with the soldiers gone. But both women had softened in the past day, if only slightly. Ida no longer slept with a knife in hand, and Mirwin had begun humming again, something she hadn't done since their first night by the river. For them, this wasn't just the end of a mission. It was a return, not to what the world had been, but to something older, something honest. When they reached the hill overlooking the valley, they paused together. In the far distance, small lights flickered from rooftops and barns. The villages below were quiet, ordinary, but Alice knew they were no longer untouched. Letters were already moving, carried by merchants and midwives, hidden in bundles of herbs and tucked beneath travel cloaks. The truth was moving with them, who the circles had been, what had been taken, and why remembering it mattered. The next weeks were full. The group didn't stay in one place. They traveled to forgotten towns, ruins where old circles had once gathered. They found more women, some who had lived hidden for years, others who had grown up hearing only bits and fragments. Some cried when they saw the maps. Others went still, holding their breath as they read the names of ancestors once whispered in shame. Every village they passed added another thread to the web. And slowly, the fear began to lift. It wasn't loud. There were no grand speeches. But people started asking questions in the open. Why certain laws existed. Why some stories never appeared in books. Why the names of midwives or herbalists had been stricken from record. And in the absence of silence, the truth found its voice again. Alice stayed with the group for as long as she could, but something pulled her back to Grey Hill, the village where it all began. When she returned, she found the fields quieter than before. The steward's post had been stripped down. His seal no longer hung above the door. Another had come in his place, one appointed to calm the unrest, though he didn't speak loudly or often. People had begun reclaiming small things, the right to gather, the right to teach old songs, the right to name the forgotten aloud. She visited her mother's grave first. It wasn't marked with anything grand, just a smooth stone she had placed there as a child. Alice knelt beside it and told her everything. About the map, about the cathedral, about the book buried beneath stone. She whispered the names of those who had stood beside her, and those who hadn't survived long enough to see the change. She promised her mother that it wouldn't end here, that the truth would keep moving, even if they had to carry it one village at a time. The night she left Grey Hill again, she didn't feel like a girl running anymore. She felt rooted, not to one place, but to a thread stretched wide across the land, woven by hands like hers, hands who had carried memory when it wasn't safe to speak. Back on the road, she rejoined Riva and the others. They were preparing to reach the southern hills where an old circle had once been burned out of existence. Rumor said one of its members had survived, living under a new name, growing herbs near a dry riverbed. If she was still alive, she'd remember the oath. And if she remembered the oath, she could teach the next. As they walked, Alice looked up at the sky. The stars had begun to appear. Soft, steady, endless. just like the web. She realized then that the story wasn't really about rebellion or defiance. It was about memory, about the quiet power of remembering who you are, even when the world tells you to forget. The thread had always existed, even beneath the ashes, even under fear. It had waited for someone to pick it up, and now it was moving again, not just through maps and books, but through hands, voices, footsteps on old paths, through women who had survived in silence, and those who now spoke loudly, through a girl who had once only hoped to stay out of trouble and now carried the story of a nation's buried truth. It would take time. There would be setbacks. Some would try to discredit them. Others would still whisper in fear. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that the lie was broken. The silence fractured, and from that fracture, something stronger had begun to grow. By the time dawn came, the trail was wide ahead of them. The birds began to sing, and Alice walked quietly, one hand on the satchel, the other brushing against the thread that would never be forgotten again.